All right, so we talked a little bit about muckraking journalism in the previous lecture. Now I want to go through an example of this, which is the History of the Standard Oil Company by Ida Tarbell, published in 1904. Now, Tarbell was an important muckraking journalist, and in this article, what she really looks at is John Rockefeller and his building of the Standard Oil Company. And she talks a little bit about his motivation. So let's dive right into it. But as we do, I want you to annotate this document, which means I want you to underline important ideas. Any comments you have, write them off to the right. Any questions you have, write them off to the left. So, to know every detail of the oil trade, to be able to reach at any moment its remotest point, to control even its weakest factor, this was John D. Rockefeller's ideal of doing business. It seemed to be an intellectual necessity for him to be able to direct the course of any particular gallon of oil from the moment it gushed from the earth until it went into the lamp of a housewife. There must be nothing in this great machine he did not know to be working right. So this is important because he says he needed to know that it was working right. And in order for it to be working right, he needed to be in control of it. And this was because John D. Rockefeller, one of the wealthiest people on earth, he believed that his wealth was evidence of the fact that he was one of the greatest people on earth. This was an idea called social Darwinism, which meant that the best people tend to do better in a society, right? So if he is at the top of society, if he's one of the wealthiest people in the world, this means he is clearly one of the most competent people. So why shouldn't he control the whole oil industry? This is kind of his thinking, right? So let's move on. It was to complete this ideal, to satisfy this necessity, that he undertook late in the 1870s to organize the oil markets of the world. He had already organized oil refining and oil transporting. Mr. Rockefeller was driven to this new task of organization not only by his own curious intellect, he was driven to it by the thing so abhorrent to his mind: competition. So she's saying this is why he's doing it. He wants to eliminate any competition in the industry. Any other smaller oil companies, he wants to force them out of business and control everything for himself. If, as he claimed, the oil business belonged to him, and if, as he had announced, he was prepared to refine all the oil that men would consume, it followed as a corollary that the markets of the world belonged to him. When Mr. Rockefeller began to gather the oil markets into his hands, he had a task whose field was literally the world. For already in 1871, the year before he first appeared as an important factor in the oil trade, refined oil was going into every civilized country on the globe. Of the 5.5 million barrels of crude oil produced that year, the world used 5 million, over 3.5 of which went to foreign lands. This was the market which had been built up in the first 10 years of business by the men who had developed the oil territory and invented the process of refining and transporting. And this was the market, still further developed, of course, that Mr. Rockefeller inherited when he succeeded in corralling the refining and transporting of oil. It was this market he proceeded to organize. The entire country was buying refined oil for illumination. Many refineries had their own agents out looking for markets. Others sold to wholesale dealers or jobbers who placed trade or local dealers, usual grocers. Mr. Rockefeller's business was to replace independent agents and jobbers with his own employees. The United States was mapped out and agents appointed over those great divisions. So what he's doing here is he is not just controlling the extraction of oil from the ground and refining it and then sending it off to be sold. He wants to control the markets in which it's sold as well. So in other words, from the point that it is taken from the ground to the point that it makes it to its ultimate destination, the customer who is going to consume that oil, who's going to use that oil, he wanted to control the markets every step of the way. And this was his goal, and this is what he ultimately does. And Tarbell is pointing out that this is absolutely related to Rockefeller's view of himself, right? This was not just something that he wanted to do. This was something that he was entitled to do because of his social Darwinistic viewpoint of the world. That he, as one of the greatest living Americans, as one of the wealthiest living Americans, he had every right to control the entire business because no one would do it as well as him.